name's Caitlin Bandy, and this is my channel, Bandy's Books. So you may have been wondering where I was last week. I'm sorry I didn't post last week, but I was really sick. I came down with a very bad bacterial sinus infection. It started in my eyes, and I unfortunately got like a really severe pink eye to the point that literally like the clear part of my eyeball was inflamed. So I had like this pocket of liquid on my eye, and I couldn't even close my eyeball. That started to clear up, but then it moved into my sinuses. So then I had just like excruciating headaches, really bad postnasal drip. I'm actually still almost completely deaf out of one ear because my ears were plugged up so bad. And I just felt so crappy that I didn't really want to try and shoot videos. I'm not a big fan of like fake it till you make it. If I feel crappy, I feel crappy, and I don't want to sit here and pretend like I don't feel good. So that's why I was gone for the week. I'm hoping that going into March, I will be a little more consistent in terms of getting videos done a little further ahead of time. So if something comes up, they're there to post. This particular video is my end of the month wrap up. For February, I decided to do something a little bit different and not focus on a particular genre, but focus on Black authors for Black History Month. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you should only read Black authors in Black History Month. I read Black authors throughout the year, as well as many other diverse authors, and I would encourage you to do the same as well. But in honor of Black History Month, I thought I would really just focus in on some of the amazing books out there by Black authors right now. Let me just say, this was a phenomenally good reading month. I am stoked. Not only was I super excited about this TBR because there are so many books that are so good or look to be so good or I've heard so many good things about, but I came in excited. I read a lot off my TBR. I did read a few books that were not on my TBR because they came up, at the library, and I'd had them on hold for like months waiting to get them. So in that case, I definitely will read off of my TBR because I'm not going to give up something that I waited for 3 or 4 months for. But generally speaking, I was able to read pretty consistently off my TBR. Since today is the last day of February, I actually have 2 books that I'm still working on. I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be able to finish both of them before the day is over. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about them in this particular wrap up. And if I do complete both of these books, then I will have finished 15 books out of the 22 that I think I originally planned, which for me is a stunningly good month. And what also made this stunningly good is that these books did not disappoint. I didn't have anything that was lower than a 3-star read for me, and the majority of the books that I read were in the 5 and 4-star categories, which is an excellent reading month. I think all of us, want months like that where you're just reading one 5-star after another. I unfortunately, have a lot of books that I still didn't get to, and I will get to them throughout the year. What's really exciting this month is I also got a bunch of books. Some were given to me by friends, some I found in little free libraries, some were gifted from giveaways, and a couple book of the month books that all kind of fit into this TBR as well. So I threw them into the TBR mid-month just to see if I could get to any of them. Let's get into it because there is a lot to talk about. So the first of the 2 books that I'm trying to finish is The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This has been on my TBR a couple times, and I've had this book for a few months now, and I finally have started reading it. It has been very good so far, but also quite sad. As you would expect, this is about a man who is a slave, and like any slave story, it's not going to be all rainbows and sunshine. I'm hoping that at the end, he'll find freedom, but obviously his life in bondage is not going to be a pleasant, uplifting story. This particular book is really interesting because it mixes in like magical realism and elements of fantasy a little bit. The main character, Hiram Walker, is the son of a female slave and the white slave owner. He's given kind of a position of privilege within the household because he is the son of the slave owner. He isn't really acknowledged directly as the son. It's not like he's treated as a son, but he's definitely treated better than the other slaves. The slave owner has a white son with his wife, and the white son is kind of an idiot. He doesn't know how to run the family business. He's more interested in gambling and drinking and like hanging out with low society. The father is nervous that he's gonna basically like gamble away the family fortune. And Hiram, on the other hand, is very, very smart and knowledgeable, and he has this almost mystical ability to remember things and predict things, and his father recognizes that, and so he confides in Hiram, and he confides in him in a way that it's like, look, I can't recognize you as my own son, but I've tried to treat you as best I can, and I need you to when I go, I need you to take care of your idiot brother here because he's gonna ruin the family fortune if not. And it's just infuriating, honestly, because he doesn't treat him as well as he can. Perhaps in the confines of slavery, he treats him okay. You know, he doesn't beat him, he doesn't torture him, but he does sell away his mother. He doesn't allow him to have a normal childhood. He doesn't recognize him openly as a son. He doesn't treat him as an equal. He treats him as an inferior. And though he perhaps shows some affection for him, it's just a weak-ass excuse, basically. Yeah, I know people will say, well, the times and this and that, and you have to understand history. It's bullshit. You're either a good person or you're not a good person, and the dad is not a good person in the story. He's not openly cruel to Hiram, but he's also not a good dad to him either. And so that's where I'm at in the story, is there's this conflict within Hiram. He wants his freedom. He wants to go find his mother. He wants to get away from being a slave. He's actually approached some people that he suspects of being free about joining the Underground Railroad and escaping. But he also is kind of pulled in by his father and his brother and honor to the family, and I do think that he's gonna break away, and I think that this is just the start of the journey. At this point, he's had an accidental drowning, and post-drowning, he's having awakening of all of these mystical elements that he had going on beforehand. So that super sharp memory, that really sharp foresight into what's gonna happen, things like that, it's becoming even stronger. Now he's starting to see the memories of past things, and I'm really interested in seeing where this is going. It is really well written so far. It's for sure gonna at least be a 4-star read, but I'm thinking maybe even a 5-star. I'm looking forward to getting to the end of this. And then the second book that I am working on finishing today is An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. And this is a book that is focused on a relationship between a couple. The husband and wife are pretty newly married, and the husband is accused of a crime that he did not commit. He's sent to prison, and it seems like he's going to be in prison for a really long time. His wife starts to fall for his best friend. She's kind of torn over, do I stay waiting for this person who's been convicted of a crime, or do I move on with my life? I'm not going to lie, it's frustrating. She's a frustrating character. It's a frustrating situation. And it's a situation that sadly is not fictional necessarily. There are lots of people sitting in jail that have been wrongly accused and wrongly convicted of crimes. It happens all the time that people have their convictions overturned because of faulty evidence, and it tears families apart. This is the thing that I think I'm taking from this book so far. Even though I'm frustrated with this female character, the main point of the story is that families get torn apart by these wrongful convictions. You can never give somebody back the years that they spent in prison. You can never give them back a relationship that was destroyed by their wrongful conviction. And I think that this is, in some ways, an examination of what happens because of the justice system here. So this has been good so far. Like I said, it is a little bit frustrating, but I definitely will be getting done with this one at least today. All right, so let's get into our 3-star reads for the month. There was only a handful of them, and honestly, all of them were high 3 stars. So the first book that I want to talk about is a book that I listened to on audiobook. It is Palmares by Gail Jones. This book I have really complicated feelings about. So it kind of took me down a rabbit hole, and I'm sorry, this is gonna be probably like the longest discussion of a book. Palmares, first of all, is a story about Black people in Brazil. I didn't know that much about this particular subject, but in Brazil there are things called Quilombo Palmares, I think it is. I'm sorry if I've butchered that to anybody that speaks Portuguese. Palmares are historical areas where Black slaves escaped to and lived in some semblance of freedom. It is an actual historical thing that happened in Brazil. I don't know a whole ton about it. I'm certainly going to be reading more about it because it sounds super interesting, but it isn't a subject at this present moment that I know a ton on. The book Palmares by Gail Jones is the story of this young girl who is born into slavery. There's magical realism mixed in, and the story spans like 20 years of her life. There are reflections on so many things that happen. There's a grandmother who speaks Arabic and is viewed as a witch by the rest of society. There's her mother. There's a priest who's raping a slave. There's education by that same priest. There's this mythical Palmares where Black people have been able to escape and live in freedom. There's a woman who's not a slave, but not a free woman, who's dressed like a socialite. There's just a lot going on. There's a lot of characters, and all of it is seen through the eyes of this young girl. And I think that some of the confusion of the story is intentional, because initially we're seeing the story through the eyes of a young child, and a lot of these things confuse her. Like at one point she's viewing this priest raping this young slave woman, and she asks her mother if they're making love, and her mother just laughs because her mother understands that even though it's not a violent rape in like the guy holding her down and violently raping her, this young slave doesn't have a choice but to have sex with him. Maybe she's resigned herself to it, but it's still rape. It's not of her free will. She's forced into it by her station in life and by the priest's power over her. The person that we're seeing all of this through is a young child, so of course she doesn't understand that nuance. Of course those things are confusing to her, and that translates into the way that you read the story. You feel that confusion, and I appreciate that. I think that that's a good thing when you're dealing with a young narrator of the story. It's fitting, especially in such complex situations. But that confusion never really evens out anywhere in the story. You never get out of the confusion and start to understand what's going on, really. It just kind of stays confusing the whole way through, and it's like 500 and something pages long. So it's a long time to feel really confused. Additionally, in my research of this book, I found out that the author, Gail Jones, who is a very famous Black American writer, did next to no research on the Palmares and Brazil and Brazilian slave history, which is frustrating because I think that she has some good ideas going into the story. I think that her idea to follow this young woman through her life and her experiences revolving around her Blackness in Brazil are great concepts. I think it falls really short. I looked into some critiques from Brazil, from people that live in Brazil, from Brazilian bloggers and book readers, and they were just frustrated by the lack of accurate representation. Many of them going into this book super excited, and then seeing that in terms of the historical context, in terms of Brazilian culture, in terms of even using the right language, this book failed on all those accounts. So I understand why that could be really frustrating. That said, for me, I think overall this is about a 3-star book. Next up is the book Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. So my mom loves Colson Whitehead. She loved his book The Underground Railroad and The Nickel Boys, and she has recommended several of his books to me. I had not read anything of his prior to this book, and I found this beautiful copy in a little free library here in Las Vegas, and I was so excited because I've been seeing it everywhere. It's just such a gorgeous cover. I love how this is kind of like an old comic book, and I really couldn't wait to kind of see what his writing was all about. I really enjoyed this. Again, this is on the high end of the 3-star spectrum. I want to say that I rated this like a 3.75 on my Storygraph. If you are on Storygraph, I'm Bendy's Books over there. Come give me a follow. We can be friends. So this book is set in New York City, and it is about a man who is called Carney throughout the story. Carney is his last name. And Carney is a used furniture salesman. He is trying to live life on the straight and narrow. He had a father who was criminal. He constantly has to deal with that, like with people remembering his father as not the best guy, and they kind of put those perceptions on him. And he's not that way. He's trying really hard. He's trying his best to do everything by the book. He's opened a business. He's got a nice wife, beautiful children, and he's working his ass off to try to make things right. But he has this cousin, Freddie, and Freddie is a little bit shady. He's not a hard criminal, but he's stealing things like pickpockets, jewelry, minor crimes. He uses the furniture store to fleece some of the stolen goods. And Carney looks the other way because it's family, it's an occasional thing, he's just selling it. He just doesn't ask questions about where it came from. But the story gets going when Freddie gets involved in a large crime where him and a group of men are going to rob a really rich hotel. Freddie recommends Carney's shop to sell all the stolen goods. Obviously, this huge influx of stolen goods from this really well-known robbery is going to draw some attention to Carney that he doesn't want. And that sends the plot spiraling in several different directions. There is a lot happening. There is social dynamics between him and his father-in-law, who is a wealthy Black man and in charge of for lack of a better word, like a Rotary Club of sorts. And he's very exclusionary towards Carney. He doesn't view him as good enough for his daughter. There's the pressures that are applied to Carney by the circumstances family's living in. He always wants better for them. He wants to get them a nicer apartment, get his kids in a safer building. There's the pressures of trying to be a good and honorable business person. And then he starts getting dragged into this criminal element. He's getting pressure applied to him by certain criminals that want certain things. And then there's a police officer that's visiting him, that's putting pressure on him. to A, take bribes so that he, won't be arrested, and then B, like, to turn people in and stuff. And there's other plot lines as well. There's just a lot going on in this book. The thing that I really loved about this was how vibrant the setting was. I've been to New York 3 times. It's one of my favorite cities to visit, and this felt like New York. It felt so true to New York, and it's written in the 60s, I want to say. 60s, 70s, something like that. Even though I haven't obviously been there in the 60s and 70s because I wasn't alive then, it felt true to what I know or what I perceived New York in the 60s and 70s to be. This had a really like gritty, grungy vibe to it, and I really enjoyed that. The description was fantastic. I could really visualize characters, the settings, everything that was going on. Super, super visual experience. I think for me, why this didn't get quite to a 4-star was just that it felt a little slow in places. There's a lot happening, and for as much as is happening, there's parts where I just felt like it dragged a little bit. All in all, definitely a good read, and I will be reading more of Colson Whitehead's books in the future. In particular, I'm very interested in reading The Nickel Boys. I've heard really amazing things about that. Next up is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. This was a book that I picked up last year sometime. My partner actually was looking at it and was really excited. I think I've mentioned this before, but my partner grew up in Angola in Africa. And so he really has been pushing me to read more books about Africa. And I mean, I love to read books set in different countries because, right now when I'm not traveling as much as I'd like, it's like getting a chance to travel, learning about another culture, learning about another country. He picked this book out for me, and it sounds super interesting. It is about a couple in Nigeria. What I learned is that in Nigeria there is an acceptance of polygamy, and that it's perfectly normal for somebody to have multiple wives. And so this book kind of revolves around that concept. The particular couple in this book, when they get married, agree that they're going to be monogamous. The wife does not want a second wife or a third wife or anything like that. She wants to be the only wife. And she talks about her experiences growing up in a polygamous family with, multiple mothers. And that was really interesting for me. I don't know a ton about polygamy in any culture, and I thought that was really interesting, learning about the family structures and the way that the wife's hierarchy works within families, how they're each responsible for children, things like that. So that part was super fascinating. And then the main plot line of the story is that the wife is dealing with infertility. So they get married, and she's trying to get pregnant, and she's not having luck. And they're getting tested, and nothing's wrong, and they can't figure out what's going on, and she just gets more and more desperate. She starts going to witch doctors. She makes this pilgrimage to a mystic up on a mountain. She has all sorts of psychological issues that are going on due to the stress on her to get pregnant. And the family is now putting pressure on her too. His parents are like, hey, it's your one job to give us a baby, and you haven't. You're failing. And she's just beside herself. And it is heartbreaking. As somebody that has a condition that is the leading cause of infertility in women, I empathized wholeheartedly with this woman. It was just so frustrating seeing the way that she's treated for not being able to bear children. Eventually, the family gets tired of waiting, and they thrust a second wife on her, which is so unfair because, they've decided they want a monogamous dynamic, and they're both okay with that. And the family basically binds their hands and forces them into this situation that neither the husband or the wife are happy about, and neither is the second wife. Like, literally nobody wins in this situation. It is so frustrating. But culturally, this is the way that it's portrayed in the story, that this is the way that this particular society is functioning. And mom and dad are like, you have to have a second wife, we have to have a child. So from there, it just is one frustrating slog of depressing. I can't say much more than that without spoiling anything, but like, if you've read some of Kristen Hanna's books like The Four Winds or The Great Alone, this is in that sort of a category where it's just so frustrating, so depressing. You just want so much more for the different characters involved. It's really good, and it's well written, and it makes you think a lot, and I learned a lot, but it is not an easy read. If you plan to read this one, please be aware there are heavy trigger warnings for infertility, loss of children, death, chronic illnesses, abusive relationships, like just all the trigger warnings basically. Read it with caution if any of those things are sensitive to you, and even if they're not sensitive to you, it's still a difficult read, so maybe treat yourself to some hot cocoa and a fuzzy blanket or something that's going to be comforting for you afterwards. It is a good book, but like I said, a difficult one. The final book in my 3-star category was a book I was really looking forward to by an author that I really enjoy. Again, this book was on the higher end of the 3 stars, and that was Noir by Nnedi Okorafor. I have read the Nicity Scripts series, which is Akata Witch, Akata Warrior, Akata Woman. And I was gifted this book at Christmas time by a Secret Santa. I was so excited to receive it. This cover is just stunning. It's like one of my absolute favorites. And from what I understood, this was more of a sci-fi, whereas the other books I'd read by Nnedi Okorafor were more in the fantasy element. So it's exciting. I really love sci-fi, and it's a genre that I would like to read more of, but I'm also kind of picky about. So this was a nice little dip into the sci-fi genre. This book is about a character named Ao, and Ao, not artificial intelligence, but she has a lot of artificial implants and things like that. She was born with a deformity, and after a car crash, she basically loses her legs and an arm. And those are replaced by cybernetic legs and cybernetic arms. And she even has her lungs are replaced by cybernetic lungs. She's got a lot of work, basically. And she's living in a society in which a lot of people are very skeptical and verging on hostile towards cybernetic repairs and cybernetic creation. They see it as an affront to God, basically, that like people that should die don't die because they're being saved by all this cybernetic technology. And so Ao has to deal with that a lot. Like, she's in the market and there's hostility towards her because, you know, if somebody sees that her arm is fake, they view her as like a freak or as other. And that's really sad. She's very isolated. She reflects a lot on her relationship with her parents, her ex-partner, and you kind of get the feeling that she's been kind of cast to the edges of society. And then she is forced into a position where she has to defend herself against some people that are hateful of artificial technology, and then has to flee. She flees towards the north of Nigeria into an area called the Red Eye. As she's fleeing, she meets a gentleman called DNA. DNA is a Fulani herdsman, and he himself has been involved in something tragic and wrongfully accused of a crime. So he is also fleeing. The two of them team up and head into the Red Eye, which is this mysterious, hostile place. It's windy, it's full of dust storms, there's been like environmental crises, and really it's just the unknown. And this is about the journey of the two of them and trying to escape. I really liked this book. It was interesting. The concept was really great, and the characters were interesting as well. My main complaint was it was too short for me. It was in at 224 pages, which is my shortest read of the month. It was really good, but I felt like, and I often feel this way with novellas, I felt like it was just a little shorter than it should have been. I wish there was a little more detail put into things. Sometimes things happen that are not really explained. Like, there's a point in which her brain connects with other cybernetic technology, and it's never really explained how that happened. Like, we get kind of a visual of what happened, but we never get any kind of scientific explanation of it. I just wish that there was like a little more detail put into it. I guess if there's maybe 50 more pages of world building in this, it would have been easily in the 4-star category for me. I still think it's a fun read. I think, you know, if you want something that's a short, quick, easy read, pick it up. I think I read this in about a night and a half. So next up is my 4-star reads, and this is gonna be where most of my library books come in. I had a couple books that were like on pre-order that were gonna be coming out soon, and then a couple books, like I said, that I had on waitlist and finally got, and then a handful of books as well from my TBR. So the first book was Fiona and Jane. This was a library book. It was releasing this month. I had it on pre-order at the library. So excited to get it. This is a story of two friends, Fiona and Jane, and their life and some of the things that they experience. It doesn't follow a straight line in terms of the narration. It kind of pops back and forth from the past, the future. It pops from one character to the next. It kind of alternates between Fiona and Jane in their telling. It's about a lot of different things. I kind of almost felt like it was like a compilation of a bunch of short stories, but throughout all those stories there's this theme of this friendship between Fiona and Jane and what they mean to each other. It was a really enjoyable story. And then I read The Sanatorium, which I had on hold for so many months. I think I put it on hold back in October for my horror month, and I didn't get it until now. So of course I wasn't going to pass it up. This is a book about a sanatorium in Sweden. I've forgotten. So it's set in Europe, and the sanatorium was used for tuberculosis sufferers. It's long since been vacant. and a real estate guy takes it over and decides he's going to make it into a luxury hotel. For me, like, that sounds like a no-go to begin with. Like, why would you want to take something like a sanatorium and turn it into a luxury hotel? Who would want to stay in something like that? Like, that just creeps me out. Why would you want to be somewhere where there's sick and suffering people? Barring that, you go into this like beautiful luxury hotel. It's been renovated, it's restaurants, and it's all about being excellent in service. And the main character is there to see her brother, and she has kind of a fraught relationship with her brother. There's some family loss, there's some dubious memories about that loss, and she's seeking some resolve on that loss. She's also struggling with the fact that she's a police officer and she did something improper on her last case, so she's been on a leave of absence trying to figure out if she even wants to be a police officer anymore. Then murders start happening at this sanatorium. There's an avalanche, they can't get out, police can't get up there, they're trapped basically. And she's the only person that has any kind of knowledge of police operation, even though she's from a different country and she doesn't follow the same protocols as the police in this particular country. They rely on her because she can at least preserve a crime scene, she can at least do a couple things to try to help while they're waiting for this avalanche to be cleared. It's really an interesting read. A lot of history of the sanatorium gets brought in. It's windy and twisty. There's a lot of times where I thought, oh, this is the person that did it, and then it goes in a completely different direction. I thought overall that the twists were pretty good, because a lot of times when I find books really twisty, I find that the authors write things that are like so far out there you can't take it seriously, and that's how they twist it. It's like, we're just gonna go so left field that you could never possibly imagine it because it's completely unrealistic, and that's gonna be this twist. And that frustrates me, because when you're operating in a book where it's set in reality, you want the twists to be believable, right? So I thought this book did that really well. Those twists fit into society and the rules of the world for the most part. They weren't too crazy. I did find the ending slightly convoluted. I was overall okay with how it resolved and everything. I didn't hate it or anything. I just found like it got just a little out there towards the very, very end. But all in all, a satisfying read. If you like something twisty and thrillerish, worth picking up. After that, I had Untamed by Glennon Doyle. That's her memoir. And I had also had that on hold for a long time and finally came through. This was a fantastic memoir. It is told in these little short stories about lots of different things in her life. And one of the things that I really appreciated in this memoir was her ability to say, I was wrong, or I've learned better since. I think that's something that's really lacking in society. Everybody wants to be an expert on everything, know everything about everything, and never wants to admit when they mess up. And I think if I took anything from her memoir, it was that it's possible to mess up, and it's possible to be wrong, and it's possible to move on from that. She initially is a Christian writer, if I remember correctly, and she is in a straight marriage, and they're having marriage issues, and she's writing books about how to resolve marriage issues and, you know, finding God and all this stuff. The marriage ends. Her husband is cheating on her. She can't move past it, decides it's not for her, and she falls in love with a woman who happens to be a very famous soccer player, actually. Her whole life is shooken up. She has this crisis of identity. She's trying to figure out who she is and what her place is in the world. And there's other issues that she talks about in this book where she has to come forward and go like, hey, I didn't know everything, and maybe I was wrong in the way that I presented it. But she's so good at talking about it and making it like, hey, why don't we all do this? Why don't we all acknowledge when we grow, or when we learn, or when we, you know, change? I also really appreciated just the humor that she tells her stories with. She is very funny and interesting. Her personality really comes through in her books. All in all, a really entertaining book. If you like memoirs, this one kind of verges slightly on motivational. I mean, I think even the motivational aspects of it were pretty well done. I can sometimes find motivational stuff to be a little hokey, but I didn't really find this particularly hokey. I thought it was just overall an excellent memoir, and if you like memoirs, I think it's definitely worth it. Getting back into the books that I had on my TBR, I have Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a really interesting book. It is designed for children more than for adults. I would say like a middle grade, and it is about Jacqueline's life growing up between South Carolina and New York City. She's kind of dealing with the remnants of the Jim Crow era and racism. It is all written in free verse. Each chapter is a different type of free verse poetry, and it's just so beautiful and interesting, understandable and palatable. It talks about some hard subjects, but it makes it very understandable for somebody that's in the middle grade age. I'm really excited because Books and Jams is doing middle grade March, and she's doing a video with a bunch of different booktubers where we talk about our favorite middle grade book. I am so thrilled because she asked me to talk about a book and I got to talk about this one. So if you don't follow Books and Jams already, which I know is like very unlikely because a lot of us cross over, but just on the off chance that you don't already follow her amazing account, please go follow it and look out for that middle grade March video so you can see all of the amazing middle grade books that people are talking about. This one, whether you're a kid or an adult, is worth a read. If you like poetry in particular, this is very poignant and highly recommended. Next up on my 4 stars was A Promised Land by Barack Obama. I love Barack Obama's writing. He is a phenomenal speaker, a phenomenal writer. He is so good at conveying his thoughts with humor in a way that is so relatable. I always felt that way when he was a president, that he was just so charismatic. And it's the same way in his books. His words come through as very genuine and sincere. And this in particular is really interesting. It goes through his rise from when he was a senator, or running to be a senator. I guess he was congressman. So it goes through his rise in politics and running for president, and then his first couple years in the presidency. And it covers a lot of really interesting topics. It talks about some of the struggles that he went through financially while he was running, some of the struggles he went through within his marriage while Michelle was dealing with the burden of raising young children and him being gone and off campaigning and all this stuff. And it deals with some of the struggles, like when he first becomes president, all the stuff that was happening. It's like, you know, you're aware of like the major things that happened, but there's all these little things that pop up where you're just like, holy shit, like, can this poor guy have any more on his plate? And one of the things that I like about him is that he's good at also admitting when he could have handled something differently, or reflecting on things and being like, hey, I did my best with what I had in this particular instance. I really love this. I think that if you're into reading about politics, you want a different perspective on, you know, presidency, you want to hear it directly from him, this is definitely worth the read. And the last 2 on my 4-star list were also kind of on the higher end of the 4-star. They're like probably in the 4.5 range, and they're both by the same author, funny enough. First one is Behold the Dreamers by Mbolo Mbue. I got this in my book of the month package. It was a book I was very excited about. I've been wanting to read this for such a long time. It sounded so amazing. And it was a hard read, I'm not gonna lie. This was not an easy read for me, but it was very poignant, and I think it should be necessary reading or mandatory reading at some point. I honestly want to petition for schools to make this required reading in maybe in high school. I think that would be a good place for it. I haven't talked about this a whole lot on my on my YouTube, sorry. My family is dealing with the immigration process right now. My partner's nephew is in the asylum process coming from Cuba. He declared asylum about 2 months ago because of the protesting and violence and stuff that's occurring in Cuba. If you're not familiar with it, you could go ahead and read about it. And so we're in my family intimately familiar with the asylum process and the immigration process. My partner also immigrated here, so he's been through the immigration process himself. This book is very much about that. This book is about 2 characters from Cameroon who have immigrated to the United States. The husband is in the asylum process, and the wife is on a student visa trying to become a pharmacist. They both have incredibly big dreams, and they're both good and hardworking people, and they're stuck in an infuriating system. They're stuck in this system that has no sympathy for people like them, has no understandability. It's not easy to navigate. It's just infuriating. You really feel for these characters, right? They have their children here. They have a life established here, and they're just under so much stress and so much pressure because of this infuriating system. It is heartbreaking. It is funny at times. It is maddening. It is a lot of things. But above all, it's accurate. The asylum system and the immigration system in the US is incredibly broken. I've been through it twice with 2 different people, and it is just, if you haven't been through it or you're unaware of it, it is just one of the most frustrating possible situations you can imagine. You come as a person seeking asylum, you're left in limbo for years with basically no official status. You can't get work permits, so you're supposed to be here supporting yourself somehow without being able to legally get work. You get put in a situation where you either have to have family to support you or you're screwed. You just have to make a decision to work illegally, or it gets very complicated. If you are unfamiliar with the immigration system, if you're unfamiliar with some of the struggles that people deal with as immigrants, particularly in terms of asylum seekers, this is a book you should read. It's very well written. It talks about a lot of these struggles in particularly poignant ways. There are some points that this book gets into that are not related to immigration, that are like more of the narrative portion of the story. But overall, I think this is a pretty accurate portrayal of an asylum seeker in the United States. And then the second book I read by Mbolo Mbue was How Beautiful We Were. This was a book that I've had for a couple months now and been meaning to read. It sounded super interesting, and I'm so glad that I finally read it. This book is about a fictional village in Africa named Kosawa. And Kosawa is kind of a tribal society. They are peaceful people living, in their village, educating their children, kind of going through their day-to-day, and an American corporation comes in to extract the oil from the land beneath them. And this company isn't confined by the laws of America because they're not operating in America. So they're dumping toxins into the water and into the environment. And children start dying in this community. Children are having illnesses that are unexplained. The doctors don't know how to fix it. Slowly, these children are just dying off. This is really about this village's struggle to chase away the oil corporation, to clean up the land and make it livable, to preserve their village and their culture and their lifestyle. It follows many generations. It's not like one generation and then the story's over. It shows you this fight in this village for multiple generations, and like how kids go away and get educated in other countries and learn the laws of other countries, so even try to fight this in other countries and other courts that they're unfamiliar with. It is also an infuriating book in that it's very easy to identify what is right and wrong, and yet somehow what's right keeps getting ignored in favor of what's wrong. And it's more maddening because you know that this is based on reality. Even though Kosawa is a fictional village, you know that this has happened in other villages in the past, in other countries. It's probably still happening in countries today. And it's, again, an accurate representation of people stuck in a country where the government won't protect them and where they allow big corporations to come in and exploit the people for profit. And it was beautiful, but it was infuriating. Again, something I would highly recommend. In the case of both of these books, they're hard reads. There's trigger warnings in both. On this one, trigger warnings for immigration, for violence, for depression, for drug abuse. In this one, violence, murder, kidnapping, rape, exploitation of indigenous people, all sorts of different stuff. But both are very, very worth reading. Let's talk 5 stars. I'm so excited. I had so many 5-star reads this month. It was a really good month for me. First up on my 5 stars was probably one of my favorite books of the month, and that was Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. If you have not read this, what are you doing? Go pick this up. So good. This book follows 2 fathers, Buddy Lee and Ike. Buddy Lee is a white man and Ike is a black man. The 2 of them have both done prison time. Buddy Lee still kind of got his foot in the shady part of the world, and Ike is reformed. He got out of prison, he started himself a landscaping business, he's worked his ass off to stay out of prison and do right by his family. They both have sons, and both of their sons are gay, and their sons happen to be married within the story. Both men have homophobic viewpoints. They are not accepting of their sons being gay, they're not accepting of their relationship, they're not accepting of their marriage. There's a lot of tension, and neither of them have really had much of a relationship with their sons since the coming out. Their sons are murdered. The police are basically failing to do anything about it. There's no leads, they're not really working hard on investigating it, and both fathers team up to get some answers, to get some resolve. The story deals a lot with their regrets towards their sons. Both men are regretful at having lost the time with their sons over their homophobia. They're both regretful of their viewpoints, and they reflect and grow, and you can tell that genuinely that they're changing inside. And they track down, or they're trying to track down basically who murdered their sons. It is so poignant and beautiful. It is definitely trigger warning heavy. There is violence and murder, homophobia, a lot of different things that are difficult, but written in a way that I think, I'm not saying that it makes it understandable, but it makes you understand the characters in the book, basically. Obviously you recognize right away that both fathers' behaviors are wrong towards their sons, but they also recognize it, and they're reflecting on it and reflecting on these memories and their regrets and things. And it's just such a beautiful book. Everybody that I know that's read this has loved it. I can't think of a single person that I know that's read it that has said it was not a good book. Next up is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This is a high fantasy book. It is the start of a trilogy. I can't get over this cover, first of all. Look how gorgeous it is. And then even the back is really pretty too. It is like I said, a fantasy. The main character, Zelly, is part of like what used to be a magical society. Her mother was magical, spiritual kind of a woman. And unfortunately, this king that took over the kingdom killed off all the magical people. There's some backstory to that, but he went in like for revenge and just murdered all of these magical people. And his line is that it's in defense of the kingdom, but that's BS. So Zelly is the daughter of this magical woman, and come to find out that she also has magical blood. And in this particular book, people are marked with magical blood by having white hair. Their hair just like leaches out of color, or they'll have like a strip of white hair if their magic is still developing. So Zelly rescues this girl from a market, and she turns out to be a princess. This thrusts them into an epic journey together. So her brother, the princess, go on a journey to bring magic back to the land, basically. There's some magical items that have to be put together, and then they have to seek this hidden temple of sorts and finish a ceremony, and then they get sent on a voyage, and if they complete the voyage, then magic will be returned to the land. It is so beautiful. This book is kind of got some elements of the Yoruba religion in Nigeria mixed in. Some of the gods and things that are portrayed in this book are actually names of orishas in Yoruba. And it just is really, really a complex, beautiful world that this author has built. The characters are well thought out. They're very believable. The villainous characters, the one thing that I like is that the villainous characters are not just villainous for being the sake of villainous. They're not just bad guys. There's logical reasons why they're bad guys. You understand how they came to be who they are. And the good characters, you understand their motivations too. I love all the cultural elements in the story. I love all the fantasy elements in the story. This is just such a big, beautiful, complex world, and I would highly recommend it. I know that the second book in the series is out. I've heard very mixed reviews on the second book. So I will be picking it up soon. I'm hoping that I'm going to love it as much as the first one, but for sure, at least go pick up this first one and check it out. Next up is the book that I started the month with, and it was so good. Seriously, started the month with a bang. Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Iyamide. Now, I went into this book thinking that it was fantasy for some reason. I don't know why I had that idea, but I did. It is not fantasy. It is a suspense thriller all the way. And let me tell you, it is suspenseful. I was at the edge of my seat. I read this in basically a day and a couple hours because I just had to know what was going on. I could not put it down. So this book features two characters named Devin and Chiamaka. They both go to an all-white prep school of sorts. They're the only two black students at this school. Chiamaka is like the popular girl. Everybody knows her. Everybody loves her. She's running to be like the class president and the prom queen and all that kind of stuff. And Devin is not so popular. He's really quiet. He lives in a not nice area. He's kind of just on the outside of things. And really the only thing the two of them have in common is that they're the only two black students at this school. What inevitably ends up happening is that they both start having their secrets outed. So somebody starts sending mass text messages to all of the students at the school telling their secrets. Devin, for example, is gay and he is outed by this person. And Chiamaka gets accused of theft, and this person that's texting the school like makes sure that the whole school is aware of it. And it starts with kind of like minor, like slightly embarrassing things like, oh, Chiamaka's crush turned her down, things like that. But then it gets really ugly really fast, and it gets really, really deeply personal really quickly. It is intense, and they're trying to, basically they team up and they're trying to figure out who is doing this to them. Why is anyone attacking them? Why is anyone interested in shaming them, basically? And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that it's racist, as they're the only two black students in the school and they're really the only two people that are being attacked. But where it goes from there, it's just wow. I mean, for days after, I was shook on this one. And my mom read it and also felt the same way. She liked it and was really like, wow. And the same thing, I've had a lot of friends read this one and they all seem to really, really love it. This is technically YA, but it does not read like YA to me. It, I think, is engaging for people of many different age groups. I will say that there's trigger warnings for heavy racism, sexual assault, outing, homophobia, murder. I think that's all the main trigger warnings. So definitely, go into it with caution, but such a good book. If you like a suspense thriller, this has Get Out vibes. It is so good. And then next up on the 5-star list was Sankofa by Chibundu Onuzo. And this was such a fun book. It was really interesting and a lot different than I expected. This book is set in England initially, and Anna is dealing with the death of her mother. She's kind of sorting through her mother's possessions. So basically, Anna has been raised with just her mom. Her mom never really talks about her father, never tells her who her father is. So she knows nothing about that side of her family. And she's going through her mom's possessions and she finds her father's diary. And it's really interesting because the diary details like how he met her mother, his motivations for being in England, his goals in life, his radicalization, all sorts of different stuff. And eventually she finds that her father became the dictator of a small African country. She takes a journey to meet her father, and it's just, most of the book is actually her spending time with her father and getting to know him and the rest of the family that she has overseas. And it's just a fascinating read. It asks a lot of difficult moral questions, and some of them it doesn't really give you a good answer. It just gives you what the character thinks about it. But it's very thought-provoking in a lot of ways. It's a shorter book, but it is packed. And I don't know, I really, really enjoyed this one. This was another one that was Book of the Month. I got this a couple months ago as an add-on. This was from like last year, I want to say. And if I don't have like 3 books from the current month, I'll add on books from past months that I've wanted to get. So this was one that I had been looking forward to getting, and I was so happy to finally get it. This definitely was an enjoyable read. I highly recommend it. And then this is in the running as well for my favorite book of the month with Razorblade Tears. I think Razorblade Tears was my favorite emotional read, and this one was my favorite like fantasy kind of like, it's not exactly a light read, but it's a lot lighter than Razorblade Tears. And that's Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. This is another really beautiful book cover and a really beautiful book. It is also a fantasy, and it's also based on the Yoruba religion in Nigeria. In this case, I found it really fascinating because it holds quite true to the structure of Yoruba. My partner is Cuban, even though he grew up in Angola, and he practices this religion. So in a lot of cases, I was actually able to go like, oh, hey, there's this character and this is the way that they're portrayed. And he'd be like, yeah, that's how they are in this religion as well. And so it's really interesting because I felt like, I already knew like the basics of the religion because of his practicing the religion, but I felt like this was a really big learning experience, and it was learning in a way that was really enjoyable. Like, I could, of course, sit down with a book on the history of Yoruba and read about it, right? But I think that reading it in terms of like a mythology or fantasy, it makes it come to life. It makes it more understandable. It takes in a lot of information, and a lot of that information is like really stuck in my head now. So basically, the main character is named Simi, and Simi is a mamiwata. Mamiwata are these mythical mermaids that are in the ocean surrounding Africa. And in this particular story, the mamiwata play the role of saviors or guardians of the souls of people dying at sea. This book is set during the slave trade, and so the mamiwata are collecting the souls of slaves that have been thrown overboard or have jumped overboard that would rather die than be taken as slaves. And their job is to collect the souls and guide them and bring them to Umoja. And Umoja is the goddess of the water, and or the right term is Orisha. So she's an Orisha, and her role is the sea, the ocean, and the waters. And she has basically made a deal with the supreme creator Olodumare that she can guide these spirits and do like they sing them to peace basically, and that helps the spirits to pass into the next existence. And Simi at one point saves a man. This young man is thrown overboard, and when he hits the water, he's still alive. And she's used to, at this point, it's always dead bodies. By the time they hit the water, they're already dead. So this is her first experience dealing with somebody that's still alive. And she takes pity on him, and she saves him. And her saving him throws this whole world off balance. Umoja is like really upset because there's specific laws that bind her ability to take care of these souls. And by saving this one person, they've risked everything. So Umoja tells Simi that she has to speak to Olodumare. Olodumare is the supreme creator. In this world, you can't just speak to Olodumare. There's somebody who is like a messenger. Think of like Hermes for Zeus. The problem is that the messenger is not conveying messages to Olodumare, or he's conveying them in ways that are beneficial to himself. And he's gaining power and trying to manipulate this world around him. And so Simi has to find a way to speak to Olodumare without having to go through the messenger. And it's a pretty epic journey that she has to go on to have this direct communication with Olodumare. It's very interesting. It includes, like I said, a ton of the Yoruba structure and religious figures. It includes a lot of African mythology. There's several mythological creatures that pop up that are, as I learned later, like actual creatures that exist in African mythology, different cultures of African mythology. The idea for the Mamiwata, the 7 mermaids that are in the ocean, is an actual thing that comes from African beliefs that Umoja, this god, and these mermaids were swimming under the slave ships, listening to the cries of the people being taken away from their homelands and giving salvation to those that didn't make it. It is such a beautiful book. It was so good. I like literally have chills talking about it right now. I highly recommend it. I can't. And my final 5-star read of the month was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I'm not going to talk about this in depth here because I just did a whole entire video on this book for the banned book tag. If you want to check that out, look up here somewhere. There will be a card that pops up. Maybe finish watching this video first and then check this one out after. This is such a poignant book. It is George's memoir of growing up Black and queer and his experiences. It is at times funny, at times heartbreaking, at times angering, and it is a book that's unfortunately currently banned in 15 states. It is something that I think would be incredibly beneficial for all children growing up because it'll make, you understand a perspective that maybe isn't your own. But I think it's especially important for perhaps queer and Black children growing up because it might make them feel less alone, might make them feel like somebody understands what they're going through, give them advice on certain situations and certain difficult topics that they might not feel comfortable talking about. So I think it's a book that really is necessary. I'm actually going to be donating this copy to, I haven't decided yet. I don't know if I'm going to donate it to a library, a little free library, or a school, but I'm going to be picking a place to donate this to. Even though I love this book and I love this cover and I want to keep it, I feel so strongly about getting these types of books out there that I want to make sure it gets into the hands of people that need it. So that was my last 5-star of the month. I, like I said, was so stoked about the overall quality of the books that I read. Fantastic writing, fantastic authors, really poignant, moving stories, a lot of difficult subjects, but written in such beautiful ways. And I would recommend any of the books that I've covered, honestly. I was going to go over some stats really quick. Total books read for the month was 19 books. Total pages read for the month was 7,158. Average page per book was up a little bit this month. We're in the 377 range. I think in previous months it's been between 320 to 350, so kind of nice to see those numbers spike a little. My longest book was A Promised Land, which was 768 pages. My shortest book was Noir, which was 224 pages. Probably my least favorite book of the month was Palmares by Gail Jones. Again, not a bad book by any stretch of the imagination, just a little confusing, a lot of characters, a lot going on. And my two favorites, well, usually I would just say my favorite, but my two favorites were Skin of the Sea and Razorblade Tears, both excellent books. I think, again, any of the books that I've mentioned are worth your time reading. I hope that you'll incorporate them into some of your future TBRs. Maybe you found some good recommendations that, you know, you're looking forward to as well. And I'm going to pop up some different graphs over here and around here that are from my Storygraph. Again, I am at Storygraph and at Goodreads at Bandy's Books. So if you're on Goodreads or Storygraph, come find me. I like to make friends. I like to see what you're reading, read your reviews, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to see the genres that I read from the month, how much there was fiction versus nonfiction, average page lengths. So it'll break it down by like less than 300 pages, 300 to 500 pages, and then above 500 pages. You'll see all sorts of little details. I think it's just fun to look at this, and I'm so excited about Storygraph. I only started it in January. I wasn't aware of it until then, and it's such a fun little tool with all the data and details. So if you're like me and you like graphs and pie charts and things like that, you should probably join Storygraph. So we'll end that there. I hope that you enjoyed this wrap up. I know it was a longer video. My TBR for March will be coming up soon. I hope that this was a good month for you like it was for me. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these amazing books or if any of them sound exciting to you. And also let me know what your favorite book of the month was, because I always want more book recommendations. So for now, I'm Caitlin Bandy. This was Bandy's Books. Thank you so much. Bye.